Are you planning a pool for your backyard, but you've been talking to your neighbors and now you're wondering, why would my project cost $40,000 more than my neighbor's project? Very similar backyards, similar pools. What the heck is going on? I'm Cristian with River Pools, and today we're joined by Jason Hughes, one of the more experienced fiberglass pool builders in the country, to talk about what drives the differences from one project to the next, and sometimes from one house, one backyard, to the one next door. Everything from permits to decisions you make, your gut reaction to things. We're going to get into all of it. This is the Pool Guys Podcast. So let's start with the big question. How can two pool builders quote the same project and be off by tens of thousands of dollars? Jason and I break it down so that you understand where the numbers come from and what they might not include. So in episode 1, we talked a lot about pricing from a number of angles, but for a couple minutes, we started to answer the question, why two neighbors might come up with two different prices for their project. Or if I'm shopping for a pool and I talk to builder number 1 and I get a price in hand, and then I go and I get builder number 2, virtually the same job, but again, there's a massive price difference between the two. So let's dive into this today. And I'll first ask, as a builder yourself, have you come across this? Have you had a customer look back and say, well, the other guy is $40,000 cheaper, or my neighbor just had one put in for $40,000 less? Have you had that happen?
Happens all the time, Christian, and I think there's a reason for that, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. But yeah, it is definitely, and yeah. One takeaway right up front is you'll have to be very intentional about making sure you understand what proposals you're getting, because there will be differences for sure.
Yeah. What's the biggest misconception that might lead to a misunderstanding here?
Yeah, I would say it's an assumption that's made, and it makes sense. We're all busy, and when we're in the process of buying a pool, we have everything else in life that normally goes on. All that stuff is still happening. I think most people are surprised by how many decisions they have to make, and I mean, if you were to count, it's hundreds and hundreds of decisions. And there's a fatigue factor, there's a bandwidth factor, there's all these things that come into play. So I think sometimes people come in assuming or really underestimating the amount of effort they're going to have to put in if they really want to analyze multiple quotes and get a true apples to apples comparison. I think there's an assumption that maybe that's not necessary. And then when there's that understanding is not there, to kind of take at a glance look and make assumptions that, hey, these two things are actually the same and there's a dramatic price difference, instead of looking at the granularities of why there's a price difference.
Right. And I think I agree. It's the granularities, and again, they're hard to understand sometimes, because proposal A, so if I'm a homeowner and proposal A doesn't structurally look like proposal B, it's hard for me to spot the differences and understand where that delta is occurring. Let's talk about just some general differences that might be occurring. So at a top level, so just real quick, 2 to 3 areas that could be driving the difference here between builder A and builder B in my case, or my neighbor's pool, which was just put in last year, and now the pool that I want to put in. Rattle off a couple right at the top.
Yeah, I think a lot of times there can be differences in the way that a pool contractor might present their proposals. For example, one contractor might give you kind of an all-in price. There's a completed design. All of the quantities of materials are included in there. It's all in there. Versus the other approach, which might be more of a, hey, here's the base stuff that you need, and you're going to need these other things too. And here's a kind of a range or a unit price, square foot price for these items. But so they don't have a completed project really proposed at that time. So we see a lot of people get caught up on that. Just one that's kind of an all-in, all-included project where you're not going to really have change orders. And the other approach is a base cost, which comes in initially looking a lot lower, but then there's certainly going to be a lot more budget dollars necessary to complete the project.
So now you can see it's not always one builder trying to overcharge you, but rather details that might be missing from the proposal. Next, we get into the costs that sometimes hide behind the contract and can add thousands quietly to the final cost of your project if you don't know what to ask.
One would be there's the easy things that really just takes a little bit of effort. So, we see people kind of forget that maybe one installer might have included a pool heater in their proposal. So a heat pump could cost $8,000 to $10,000. Where there's an $8,000 to $10,000 swing, they might have overlooked the fact that one builder included it and one builder did not include it. So that's one broad category. It's like you can kind of look, as long as you look it over, you will kind of pick up on those things. And the other are the questions that they might not know to ask. So that's really the watch outs. And so these are things like if there's allowances in a contract or proposal that might cover a certain amount of something like dirt hauling or electrical work or patio work or retaining walls. And then there's a known overage that they're going to have to account for and pay for in the future. That's a whole nother category. And then there's also items that they might not think to ask if they're included at all. And these might be filling the pool with water, the transportation if you're doing a fiberglass pool of the shell to the home, things like that a lot of people would probably assume would be in there, but are not in there.
Yeah. And so today is not, I feel like this conversation is more probably of a note-taking session for the homeowners, like coming up with lots of different thoughts, things to jot down so they can go back and make sure that they check off on their own to-do list, because you're going to rattle off, one, no two backyards are ever going to be the same. Builders approach things differently. So I think the takeaway here is to give you as many things to think about, the listener or the viewer, wherever you're consuming this, just info for you to take away that would help you in collecting bids or understanding the difference between your project and your neighbors. Let's talk about like site-specific surprises, or ideally, there are no surprises. There can be, but with site-specific things, you mentioned retaining walls, dirt hauling. What are some things in there that could cause a big difference, builder to builder or backyard to backyard?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if someone has a sloped backyard, retaining wall would certainly be at the top of that list in terms of a big swing from one proposal to another, because a retaining wall could cost as low as $5,000 or $10,000. It could cost as much as $50,000 to $70,000. So that would be at the top of the list. If we're doing a fiberglass pool and a crane is needed to crane the pool to the backyard, that cost could swing from a number that's included in a proposal to maybe $7,000 to $9,000 if it's a huge reach for that crane to make it to the pool site. And then just generally dirt hauling in general, depending on where you live, can be, it could be if you live in the country and your neighbor can take the dirt, it might not cost anything. If you live in a more densely populated area with very little area, space to dump materials, then it could cost as much as $6,000 or $8,000 to dispose of the dirt from the excavation.
Some of those hidden costs come from things your builder can control, and others, things nobody can control. Now let's talk about permits, regulations, and all the red tape that might make your project feel daunting at times, but can also add costs to the project you're planning for your backyard. What are some differences there? I call my friend in Fairfax and I say, hey, I'm putting the same pool in that you got, but, or I'm living in Fairfax and I call my friend down here in the country. That's probably what's going to happen. And I'm saying, hey, I'm putting the same pool in that you got, but this thing is costing me a lot more than what you did, and I don't feel like I'm doing a whole lot more. I don't get the difference here. Let's talk about regulations, permits, requirements by municipalities, HOAs. What are some things that could be encountered there?
Yeah, great point. So whether and we have the advantage in Virginia to work in all types of municipalities, from the country to the very congested cities. So we get the full gamut there. And so this could apply no matter where you are in the country, whether you're out west. I was just out west last week visiting some franchisees in Colorado and Utah. They certainly have smaller, tighter backyards for many of their projects. The difference can be this, so you could have the same exact pool, and let's even say it's the same patio materials. The difference really would come down to what those municipalities would require. So, for example, what we're starting to see is more and more of these local requirements have a square footage limit. So, for example, in many counties right now, if you exceed 2,500 square feet of what they call disturbed area, and that
Okay.
would include the pool area, the patio area, 10 feet around that, and the access lane and an area to stockpile any spoils. If you add all that up and it exceeds, in this case, 2,500 square feet, it requires what's called a grading plan. These are their terms. These names and numbers can change, right? But the idea is the same. And so let's say that's triggered and that's required. Well, it requires an engineered plan that describes where the surface water runs and a means to be able to capture and deal with that runoff water is then designed, and it also has to be built as part of that grading plan. So just
Right.
on the engineering side of that, that could run $3,000 to $8,000 just for the plan itself, and then for the implementation, it could be anywhere from $8,000 to $20,000. So all in, it's not uncommon to see these grading plan situations run close to $20,000 to $30,000.
Right. And those seem like big, steep numbers. Oftentimes, the municipalities are trying to work proactively to manage storm water in an area so that a neighborhood doesn't have changes to the topography so much that causes flooding in one particular area versus another, or flooding that ends up in a street when it begins to rain in a neighborhood. And if everybody were to on a street modify their backyard however they want, you could end up with significant problems, neighbor to neighbor, there in the neighborhood, and so that's what they're trying to mitigate is issues down the road. But the permitting, the engineering, and then as you said, the implementation might just be a required cost depending where you are. Once you finally get your permits in hand, it's time for the exciting part to bring the pool in and actually start construction. Let's talk about how that fiberglass pool gets to your backyard, what options builders have, and how this might affect the final price tag of your project. Do all fiberglass pool installers use cranes? Are there other methods? How do you guys in Virginia determine whether a crane is needed job site to job site? How do you handle it?
Yeah, great question. So this is mainly going to be determined by the access lane that the builder is going to use to get to the backyard. So some contractors with limited. So if you go out west in smaller, tighter yards, a lot of times it's every pool is a crane set, meaning
Okay.
there's a crane or a boom truck every single time. About half the time in Virginia, the majority of the time in Virginia, actually, we're able to get an excavator that we use to dig the hole to the backyard, and we can actually use that same machine to lift the pool off the truck, transport it to the backyard, and set it in the hole.
Mm-hmm.
Some builders will also use what's called a telehandler or a reach forklift. It's basically a forklift, four-wheel drive forklift on steroids, and it can boom the pool out. They can set it with that. Those are the three typical pieces of equipment that are used, and it varies so much from region to region and city to city.
Yeah, and I would also imagine builder to builder, what equipment do they own versus what do they need to rent? And, locality based, location based, your builder may own certain equipment, may not. In smaller, tighter areas, they probably are just going to rent the crane every time because they're going to own the excavator, or, just depends on what they have on hand and what their operation model is. Correct me if I'm wrong, but in that access lane needs to be about 16 to 20 feet wide. I think the excavator needs 16 feet to go through. Our pools at the widest are 16 feet. So I'd say if you had 16 to 20 feet between your house and the property line for equipment to get back there, it's pretty likely that the excavator on hand or telehandler on hand would be able to get the pool back, and a crane may not be necessary.
Yeah, and there's certainly instances where we'll install pools with a 36-inch access, where you can just get a tiny little walk behind front end loader back there. And, then it's a crane situation. And, I think the main thing from a cost standpoint here when it comes to cranes and getting the pool to the backyard is really it's going to come down to the distance the crane has to reach. So if you are not able to get the pool around the side of the house, and let's say there's a lot of trees or overhead utility lines in front of the house, and or if the pool's along a distance from the back of the house, the farther away from the road or from wherever the crane can set up, obviously the more that's going to cost. So, that's something that you can look out for. And if someone is really ambitious and they really want to find out how much it costs, a crane company would be happy to send a sales rep out and just give you a quote for that.
Oh, interesting. So as the homeowner, I could just call that company independently and say, hey, would this be needed? About how much? That would be really good, helpful information. And generally speaking, the bigger the crane needed, the more the cost for sure.
Certainly.
All right, we talked about dirt hauling. That's a pretty simple, straightforward thing. Do you have room to keep the dirt or do you not? And if you don't, maybe a couple questions like, how far does the truck have to haul? That's going to factor into the price tag of that portion of the project. What's the turnaround time on that run? How many loads are going to need to be hauled out? Those are simple questions to ask the builder, just so you as the homeowner get an understanding there. Of course, just because the pool and equipment and crew is on site doesn't mean the surprises are over. You've done a lot of planning to this point, but as digging begins, you just don't know what lies underground. From rock, abandoned oil tanks, or in one case, a burial site from the 1600s. Spoiler alert, that's a true story. Talked about dirt hauling. That's a pretty simple, straightforward thing. Do you have room to keep the dirt or do you not? And if you don't, maybe a couple questions like, how far does the truck have to haul? That's going to factor into the price tag of that portion of the project. What's the turnaround time on that run? How many loads are going to need to be hauled out? Those are simple questions to ask the builder, just so you as the homeowner get an understanding there. What about, and these are all things they can plan for, what about the unknowns? So my pool builder starts to dig and might find that could cost me something. And maybe they've got an allowance for it in there. Maybe they don't. It could be a surprise. What could happen when we start digging?
Yeah. So depending on where you live, there might be rock in the ground that needs to be hammered out. There could be a high water table that's encountered. You start digging and then water starts to pour into the hole. There can be areas where construction debris has been buried before. Mm-hmm. There can be underground abandoned oil tanks. These are all things that we've seen. We've encountered a Christian burial from the 1600s in one historical part of Virginia one time. So yeah, there could be some interesting things in the ground.
I bet that held that job up for a few weeks, I would imagine.
Yeah. They went full Indiana Jones and hired someone to come out and go through the whole process of a meticulous excavation and all that. So anyway, yeah, that was a neat situation.
But again, completely unknown. Yeah, I mean, abandoned oil tanks, things that were just unmarked, didn't know they existed, rock underground, water. So, and again, you can't find those things with misutility coming out and marking the ground. Any private lines are not going to be found ahead of time if it's a property that you did not develop yourself. And I tell you what, I've heard more and more about here lately is construction debris buried underground, particularly in developed neighborhoods, and might find that a portion of their backyard was just sort of the dump site that was buried over with dirt. How often do you come across that? And is it really most commonly in developed neighborhoods, suburban areas?
Yeah, not necessarily. We've come across this a few times. So, we've had instances where, 20 feet down from the surface, there's tree stumps that were buried by the developer or whoever cleared the lot. That has certainly happened. So all that needs to come out. Obviously, it needs to be replaced with compactable fill material. Mm-hmm. And, So just to give everybody a rough overview from a rock and water standpoint, what that might, what you should pay attention to there. Pool builders will likely have a rock or water clause in their contract. So in the event that they encounter rock or water, this is what that cost structure could look like. And I've seen that they vary dramatically. Some might just be an automatic, it's going to be $20,000. Some might have a per day cost, $3,000 or $4,000 a day. So we've certainly seen pool builders use that as an opportunity, kind of like a gotcha, because once you're in it, it's they feel like they can have that clause in the contract and it's an exorbitant amount. But usually, if you're going to encounter rock, the type of rock that has to be hammered out and removed, that could be in the $4,000 to $10,000 range to get that removed and then dispose of it. Mm-hmm. If you're encountering groundwater, depending on the soil condition, if it's sandy soil, you might get a lot of cave-ins. With a fiberglass pool, we don't want to put that sand back in. We want to replace that with stone. So there could be a cost associated with that. So that could be in the $3,000 to $8,000 or $9,000 range with high water. I would say that's pretty rare, even in Virginia, where we work in a lot of coastal situations. And on the rock side, we work up in the mountains and up in Northern Virginia, and we encounter rock, and that's actually pretty rare that happens as well.
Yeah. And on those, those water table situations or sandy or, conditions that cause cave-ins, the expense is not necessarily digging that out, but you have to put material back in its place. So requiring, well, one, you may have more to haul out, but two, you've got to now backfill that space with stone, add more stone to the base, put more on the backfill side. And that's where that expense would come in.
Yeah, certainly has a lot to do with the cave-ins there.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so you really don't know what's underground until the digging begins. But sometimes there are surprises above ground, too. In this next segment, Jason shares some common shortcuts that might save you or your builder some time now, but could cost you dollars and headaches later on. You've actually been out to, homeowners have reached out to your company to say, I was left high and dry by my pool builder, or something here doesn't look right. I need a second opinion. And in various cases, you and your company have actually gone out to reset the pool, redo the pool, finish the pool. What are some of the more common shortcuts you've seen? So lack of best practices used in an attempt to save money on the pool builder's part, lack of knowledge, but things that could lead to upfront savings potentially or problems down the road for the homeowner. You've done a few of these. What have you seen?
Yeah, and I would just say, look, if you're in business long enough, it's inevitable. You're going to find this. This is going to happen regardless of what industry you're in, and it's usually not. It's usually not deleterious. It's usually not intentional. It's usually, honestly, it comes from a result of lack of training of their teams, lack of training of their subs. That's usually where this comes from. It would be things like, to speak about a few specific examples, not supporting the plumbing around the outside of the pool, right? That eventually could lead to settlement of the plumbing and result in leaks down the road, which is the thing that needs to be avoided at all costs. Using a different type of backfill material around the outside of the pool and under the pool other than clean chipped stone. That has not produced great results statistically. And those are the two biggest ones that stand out to me that can lead to things like pool settlement, leaks in the plumbing. And those are two main issues that I think customers want to avoid at all costs.
And the best practices that you and pool builders across the country, fiberglass pool builders across the country, utilize can be seen on our website. If you go into riverpoolsandspas.com, you go to the About Us and go down to installation, you can see those best practices that really are used by the best installers coast to coast, and they should be embraced. And if you take those set of practices and compare them to the proposal you're getting, then you should be able to see whether or not they're trying to make the price look better up front, or whether their install methods could potentially produce problems for you down the road. So there's a quick check for you. So even when your builder does everything right, there's one more thing that could still sneak up on you as a homeowner. We're talking about cost creep. Now we're going to talk about small changes and small decisions that you might be making along the way. When added up, these elements that are outside of the original scope of work could leave you with a surprise bill at the end. Here's unexpected cost creep, and my neighborhood is not going through this right now, but easily could go through this because the pool we were watching this morning being built is here in my neighborhood. We're replacing a concrete pool that is 55, 60 years old. Lots of renovations over the years that have just resulted in the need for a new pool. So we're working with the builder and had a base price with the contract. Everything's been great. And of course, we're presented with upgrades and options at the last minute, and having to hold ourselves back from, making upgrades that are going to push the budget, blah, 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 because we don't know what surprises we might encounter just yet. So how do homeowners prevent themselves from experiencing creep? What are some areas that commonly lead to that in the residential area? You have conversations like this with homeowners?
Yeah, I do. And I think is so stepping out of stepping out of the role of through the eyeballs of someone wanting to buy a pool and stepping into the pool builder side of things. It's much easier for a pool builder to just enter into a agreement knowing there's going to be a bunch of change orders down the road, kind of like they're busy, there's a lot going on, they're working with other people trying to buy pools, they're trying to get pools installed, and it's like, let's just figure this out later. That is actually the biggest cause of this kind of cost creep that you're talking about, Cristian. So the best thing that a customer can do, or a potential pool buyer can do on the front end, is really it really goes back to beginning with the end in mind. So in other words, don't sign a contract until you have everything mapped out. In 95% of the cases, everything can be planned and mapped out, and it requires a lot of work on the front end, but in doing so, you avoid having to figure it out down the road, which ultimately leads to these surprises. And so what I'm talking about is having a site plan that's in writing that you agree to, knowing exactly where the pool's going, where the filter system's going, exactly the dimensions of the patio, what patio materials, what type of coping material, if there's a retaining wall, if there's steps, if there's a fence, all these things, all of it, everything, every build item that's required should be determined before the first shovel goes in the ground. Then the only change orders that could happen at that point, assuming there's no surprises, would be change orders that customer wants to take on themselves. So they want to expand the patio or whatever. So that's the biggest thing that people could do.
Yeah, planning ahead, performing due diligence, making sure you're prepared, and understanding as much as you can upfront, and then understanding the unknowns that might pop up by surprise, just because they're hard to plan for. So how do you manage contractors, timelines, and a budget that seems to want to move all over the place? This is where experience and trust come into play. Not just trusting your builder, but trusting the process itself.
I think this could be very important for someone considering a pool, because again, the more informed you are coming into this, the more you're going to safeguard against surprise costs or surprises in the process. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's best for the customer to kind of step in and try to be the driving force behind that. I would say it's great to have an understanding of the requirements, but you really need to be able to trust the pool builder and trust their process. And if you feel like you can't trust their process, then maybe you don't have the right pool builder.
Yeah, yeah. So you probably can get base information from your municipality, but lean onto your pool builder as a guide. And if something feels off there, lean into your gut reaction, your gut feelings.
Yeah, and I would
there.
say, especially if you're talking to someone who's not done a lot of work in your area, maybe they have a little bit of a drive for them. They maybe have done one or two jobs, but don't have a lot of experience in your locality. I would definitely have that on your radar.
Yeah. But it's also not to say that, a lack of experience doesn't mean you're going to get a lesser quality. Every pool builder starts with their first pool, right? And They turn out to be great builders and lifelong career builders. But it is nice to lean into the experience if it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and not to belabor this point, but specifically in this area, contractors will build relationships with the individuals at a county or city, government office, building and zoning office. And there's no special treatment there, but it's just the fact that they do know the process really well. But there's not anything that would prevent a brand new pool builder from doing a great job with that process as well, if they do their homework.
Right. It really comes down to what we talked about in episode 1. Are you building a good rapport with this builder? Do you find trust in what they're saying? Are they open, transparent? Are they acting more as a guide rather than somebody feels like they're maybe dragging you through a process? All of these, and they're gut check moments, right? And then they're going to happen multiple times throughout the process. Which sort of leads into this next thing: quality versus cutting corners. What are some of the things on the surface that a homeowner might look out for to determine I've got somebody who's going to give me a quality product, quality communication throughout, versus is this guy cutting a corner? How do you spot those things? And where are some areas that, could catch homeowners off guard there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, the world we live in now as contractors is much different than it was even 10 years ago.
I would agree
Meaning,
with that.
the way that we are able to communicate with each other, form groups, and just talk about these things on social media has really leveled the playing field to a high degree. So it's really harder now for someone who's actually doing a poor job and trying to cut corners to get away with it. It's just a matter of time before someone shines a light on that, which is, in my opinion, that's a great thing. So, but there's still, we see both sides of this. So on one side, we see that there are people that will pool owners, pool customers will micromanage their pool builder and scrutinize every little detail of everything they're doing. And, and that may be needed in some cases, but in most cases it's not. So again, going back to the process and trusting the process, because it doesn't, if things are going well, it doesn't really help the homeowner to do that in that case. It's not really benefiting them at all. On the other side, we do see instances where there may be some recommended practices for specifically installing fiberglass pools that are just flat out being ignored. And so experience has shown that statistically, those recommended practices lead to better results. They really do. So, those are, we're talking specifically about installation methodologies for installing a fiberglass pool shell, right? And just things that you need to properly prepare and lay a patio and coping stones and tile. So if those things look like they're in line, you're probably in good shape there. So the cutting corners is something to keep an eye on for sure. I think the more educated a person is going into the process, the more they'll be able to pick up on these things. Hey, this doesn't quite look right. Maybe ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking about the ways that a pool builder could cut corners today, and it has more to do with the workmanship than it does the quality of the products themselves.
Yeah. And no matter how organized your plan, there's one thing that can never really be captured in writing on a contract: trust. That's where your gut comes in. Jason shares how listening to your instincts could help you avoid regret. Anything else we should cover on this one? I feel like this is a great conversation, and one that could shed a lot of light on why two pool builders might come in for the same project with wildly different costs. Why my neighbor's pool may have gone in, $40,000 cheaper than the one I'm planning to put in, even though it's the same. And I feel like we've covered. Are we missing anything here?
I think there's one thing. There's one thing we're missing, and it's this. It's a factor that's more subjective than it is objective. Because everything we've talked about this so far has been pretty objective. It's like dollars and cents, black and white. There's another part here that I think is equally important, because you just asked about, has anybody ever come back with regrets?
Yeah.
And each time someone comes back with a regret, they will say something like, I just wish I would have listened to my gut. And so one good exercise to go through this process, do all the due diligence. But before making a decision, just for a second, just step away from the price tag, step away from when the project might start or be finished, and just say, what is my gut telling me to do here? Because we can receive really good insights about who we should trust. Because a lot of this trust is incredibly important, because a pool is not like a car. We can't just take it back. Once you enter into an agreement with a pool builder, it is, in a lot of ways, it's like a marriage. You're stuck together through this process, and it's a mess, and it takes a long time. Both sides are probably going to get frustrated at some point, and you're going to have to work through some things, because nothing ever goes perfectly. So you need to make sure you're working with someone that you can trust. So go with your gut would be my last comment.
Yeah. Well, we touched on that the last episode as well, and I'm certain it will come up in many, many more conversations. But it's a huge part of the decision-making process, and more often than not can save you from headache in a variety of situations. Jason, appreciate your time, man. This is a lot of fun. Let's do some more of these.
Sounds great, Cristian. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, buddy. So there it is. From prices, permits, shortcuts, surprises, gut check moments, now you understand what drives sometimes a massive difference between pool quotes. Remember, your goal right now is not to build a pool. Your goal is to build a smart plan for your pool, to know exactly what you need and exactly what you're going to be buying. Also, to choose a builder who gives you comfort and confidence in the entire process. This is episode 2 of the Pool Guides podcast. I'm Cristian with River Pools. We will see you in a future episode, my friends. Catch the wave.